The frost clung to every surface like a second skin, turning the sprawling Christmas tree lot into a crystalline wonderland that sparkled under the pale December sun. Lieutenant Sarah Collins stepped out of her patrol vehicle and felt the cold immediately bite through her uniform jacket, her breath forming small clouds that dissipated into the morning air. Beside her, K-9 Max landed on the frozen ground with the quiet grace of a predator, his ears already rotating like satellite dishes, scanning for signals invisible to human senses. The Belgian Malinois shook once, his sleek tan and black coat rippling, and then fixed his amber eyes on the maze of pine trees stretching before them. Sarah adjusted the leash in her gloved hand and surveyed the scene. The Buckhead Christmas Tree Emporium occupied nearly 3 acres of prime real estate, a temporary village of evergreens that materialized every November and vanished by December 26th, leaving behind only scattered needles and the ghost of holiday commerce. Rows upon rows of noble firs, Fraser firs, and Virginia pines stood propped against wooden frames, their branches heavy with the weight of ice crystals that had formed overnight. The temperature had dropped to 19 degrees the previous night, unusual for Atlanta even in December, and the result was a landscape that looked more like Vermont than Georgia. Workers in heavy coats moved between the rows, their movements sluggish in the early hour, steam rising from paper cups of coffee clutched in gloved hands. The lot had opened 30 minutes ago, and already a handful of early shoppers wandered the aisles, breath visible, fingers pointing at potential candidates for their living rooms. Sarah had been assigned what dispatch called a routine security presence, a request from the lot owner who had reported suspicious activity over the past week. Vehicles parked after hours, shadows moving between the trees when the lot should have been empty. Nothing concrete, nothing that warranted a full investigation, but enough to make a businessman nervous during his most profitable season. She had almost declined the assignment, but something in the dispatcher's voice, a hesitation, had caught her attention, and Sarah Collins had learned long ago to trust hesitation. Max pulled slightly at the leash, not with urgency, but with interest, his nose working the cold air. The scent landscape here was complex, layered with pine resin and frozen earth, exhaust from delivery trucks and the lingering traces of hundreds of human visitors. For a dog, with Max's training, it was like walking into a library filled with books in every language, each one demanding attention. Sarah let him lead, trusting his instincts as she had for the past 4 years. They moved past the front entrance, where a cheerful attendant in a Santa hat waved at them. Past the checkout station, where a middle-aged woman was already haggling over the price of a 7-foot Douglas fir. Past the hot chocolate stand that was just beginning to heat its first batch. The lot was organized in sections, with the premium trees near the front commanding prices that made Sarah's salary look modest, and the more affordable options relegated to the middle and back. Strings of unlit Christmas lights crisscrossed overhead, waiting for darkness to fulfill their purpose. Max's pace changed subtly, a slight tensing of his shoulders that only someone who knew him intimately would notice. Sarah felt it through the leash, that electric connection they had developed through countless operations. She slowed her breathing and sharpened her attention, letting her eyes sweep across the surroundings without focusing on any single point. Peripheral awareness, her instructors had called it, the ability to see everything by looking at nothing. They were approaching the back section of the lot now, where the trees grew denser and the customers grew scarcer. This was where the overflow inventory was stored. Pines and firs stacked horizontally on massive wooden pallets, waiting to replace the trees sold out front. The ground here was harder to navigate, covered with fallen needles that had turned into a slippery brown carpet under the frost. A chain-link fence marked the boundary of the property, beyond which lay an empty lot that had once been a car dealership before the economy had claimed it. Sarah noticed the fence had been patched in several places, makeshift repairs using wire and zip ties. Max stopped. The suddenness of it made Sarah's heart skip, her hand automatically moving to rest on the butt of her service weapon. The Belgian Malinois stood rigid, every muscle locked, his head pointed toward a pile of trees stacked against the fence like cordwood. His ears were fully forward, his tail straight out behind him, his breathing so controlled it was nearly invisible. Sarah had seen this posture hundreds of times. Max had found something. She keyed her radio and spoke quietly. "Dispatch, this is Collins. I'm at the Buckhead Christmas lot, rear of the property. My K-9 has indicated on something. Request backup, non-emergency for now." The radio crackled back with an acknowledgement, and Sarah began to approach the stack of trees, Max moving in perfect synchronization beside her. The pile was about 8 feet high, maybe 30 trees deep, their trunks facing outward like the bars of a cage. The frost on their branches was thicker here, undisturbed by customers or workers, suggesting this section had been untouched for at least a day or two. Max led her around the left side of the pile, his nose inches from the ground, following an invisible trail that only he could perceive. They reached the back of the stack, where the trees pressed against the chain-link fence, and Max sat. The formal indication. His body trembled slightly with the effort of restraint, every instinct screaming at him to dig, to uncover, to complete the hunt. But his training held him still, his eyes fixed on a specific point in the tangle of branches. Sarah knelt beside him and looked where he indicated. At first, she saw only pine needles and shadow, the dark spaces between tree trunks where light failed to penetrate. Then her eyes adjusted, and she saw the black plastic. It was industrial grade, the kind used for construction projects or landscaping, wrapped tight around something roughly the size and shape of a human body. The plastic had been tucked beneath the lowest trees in the stack, invisible from any angle except this one, hidden with the casual efficiency of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Sarah's hand moved from her weapon to her radio. "Dispatch! Upgrade that backup to emergency. I have what appears to be a body at the rear of the Buckhead Christmas Tree Emporium. Get me homicide and CSU." The next 30 minutes transformed the festive tree lot into a crime scene. Yellow tape went up, customers were escorted out with apologies and vouchers, and workers were gathered in the front office for preliminary questioning. Sarah stood guard over the discovery site until Detective Marcus Webb arrived with his team, a grizzled veteran with salt and pepper hair and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. He nodded at Sarah as he approached, his gaze sliding past her to the black plastic visible beneath the trees. "Hell of a way to start the Christmas season," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 23 years in homicide. "What can you tell me?" Sarah briefed him on the sequence of events, Max's indication, the timeline. Webb listened without interruption, then directed his team to begin the careful process of removing trees to access the body. It took nearly an hour, each pine being photographed, tagged, and removed to maintain the integrity of the scene. Sarah watched from a respectful distance, Max sitting alert at her side as the black plastic cocoon was finally fully exposed. The medical examiner, a small woman named Dr. Patricia Vance, knelt beside the remains and began her preliminary assessment. Sarah couldn't see her face, but she could read the tension in her shoulders, the pause in her movements that indicated something unexpected. Webb walked over to Sarah, his expression grim. "Male victim, appears to be in his 40s, signs of blunt force trauma to the head. Been here maybe a week based on decomposition, though the cold has slowed things down. No identification on the body." He paused, rubbing his jaw. "But there's something else. The plastic wrap, the way the body was positioned, the location chosen for concealment. This wasn't a crime of passion or a random dump job. Someone took their time with this. Someone who knew what they were doing." Sarah processed this information, her mind already constructing scenarios. The lot owner reported suspicious activity over the past week, vehicles at night, movement between the trees after hours. I'd written it off as kids or homeless seeking shelter. Webb's eyes sharpened. We need to talk to that owner, and I want to know everyone who's had access to this lot since Thanksgiving. The owner's name was Gerald Finch, a heavy-set man in his 60s with a nervous disposition that had only intensified since police had shut down his business. Sarah found him in the front office, surrounded by his employees, wringing his hands like Lady Macbeth. "I knew something was wrong," he kept repeating. "I could feel it. There was something off about this season, something I couldn't put my finger on." Sarah pulled up a chair and sat across from him, Max settling at her feet. "Tell me about the suspicious activity you reported, Mr. Finch." Finch nodded rapidly, eager to cooperate. "It started about 10 days ago. One of my night security guards, Carlos, reported seeing a van in the back of the lot around 2 in the morning. He approached, but it drove off before he could get a plate number. Then, 3 days later, another guard reported the same thing, different van, same spot, same time." Sarah made notes. "And you reported this to dispatch when?" 6 days ago, after the second incident. I thought maybe someone was planning to steal trees. Happens every year, kids thinking they can take a free pine home for the holidays. But it felt different this time." Sarah leaned forward. "Different how?" Finch struggled to articulate his unease. "The vans were too nice, too clean, and they always parked in the exact same spot, right by the back fence. If you wanted to steal trees, you'd park closer to the front where the good inventory is. These guys were specifically interested in the back, where we keep the overflow. The back, where they had just found a body." Sarah thanked Finch and stepped outside to find Webb. The detective was on his phone, his expression darkening with each passing second. When he ended the call, he turned to Sarah with something close to respect in his eyes. "We got a preliminary ID through fingerprints. Victim's name was Robert Kellerman, 47 years old, local businessman." He paused significantly. "And by businessman, I mean the kind that makes his money in ways that don't show up on tax returns. Kellerman was connected to half a dozen shell companies that our financial crimes unit has been tracking for 2 years. Money laundering primarily, funneling cash from illegal gambling operations into legitimate businesses." Sarah felt the case expanding around her like ripples in a pond. "So this isn't just a murder. It's organized crime." Webb nodded slowly. "And that means we need to be very careful about who we trust and how we proceed. Kellerman had connections everywhere, including, if the rumors are true, inside the department." The implication hung in the cold air between them. Sarah had encountered departmental corruption before, isolated incidents that were quickly excised like tumors from the body of the force. But Webb was suggesting something more systemic, a rot that might extend further than anyone wanted to believe. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Webb considered her for a long moment. "You found the body. You're already involved whether you want to be or not. I could use someone I trust on this, someone whose loyalty isn't compromised. You and that dog of yours have a reputation for finding things other people miss." Sarah looked down at Max, who gazed back at her with complete trust and readiness. "We're in." The investigation unfolded over the following days, like a dark flower blooming in winter. Robert Kellerman's legitimate business had been a consulting firm specializing in small business development, a perfectly boring front for an operation that moved tens of millions of dollars through a network of car washes, laundromats, and seasonal businesses. Seasonal businesses like Christmas tree lots. The discovery hit Sarah like a physical blow. She was sitting in Webb's cramped office, surrounded by files and photographs, when she made the connection. "Finch's lot," she said, pointing to a financial document. It's one of the shell companies. The ownership traces back through 3 different holding companies, but the ultimate beneficiary is the same network Kellerman was working for. Webb leaned back in his chair, the springs creaking in protest. Gerald Finch has been running a money laundering operation out of a Christmas tree lot, and he probably doesn't even know it. The shell companies handle the real ownership. He just thinks he's leasing the land and running a seasonal business. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. But if Kellerman was part of the same network, why would they kill him? Why would they dispose of the body on property they control? It doesn't make sense. Webb tapped a pen against his desk rhythmically. Unless there was a falling out, maybe Kellerman got greedy, or maybe he threatened to talk. The criminal world isn't known for its job security. A knock on the door interrupted them. A young officer entered with a folder, handing it to Webb with the nervous energy of someone delivering bad news. Webb opened the folder, scanned its contents, and his face went pale. "We've identified one of the vans from the security footage," he said slowly. "It's registered to a company called Meridian Logistics, which wouldn't mean anything except Meridian Logistics has exactly one client." He looked up at Sarah with troubled eyes. "The Atlanta Police Department." Sarah felt the temperature in the room drop. "What kind of services do they provide?" Webb's voice was barely above a whisper. "Equipment transport, evidence transport." He paused. "Disposal services." The word hung between them like a guillotine blade. Sarah understood immediately what Webb was suggesting. Someone inside the department was connected to Kellerman's death. Someone with access to vehicles and the knowledge of how to avoid leaving evidence. The hunter had just become the hunted. The next 72 hours tested Sarah's paranoia and her principles in equal measure. She and Webb agreed to keep their suspicions within a tight circle, bringing in only 2 other detectives they trusted implicitly. They set up a shadow investigation, working off-site when possible, using personal phones for sensitive communications. Max became more than a partner during this time. He became a barometer. Sarah had learned to read his reactions to people, the subtle shifts in his body language that indicated comfort or caution. When they passed certain officers in the hallway, Max's hackles would rise almost imperceptibly. When they entered certain rooms, his nose would work overtime, cataloging scents that Sarah could only imagine. She began keeping a mental list of everyone who triggered Max's instincts. The financial trail eventually led them to a name: Vincent Harlow. On paper, Harlow was a successful real estate developer with projects across the Atlanta metropolitan area. In reality, according to the evidence Webb's team had compiled, Harlow was the architect of the entire money laundering network. Kellerman had been his accountant, his numbers man, the one who knew where all the bodies were buried, sometimes literally it seemed. But Harlow was untouchable through conventional means. His lawyers were expensive and ruthless, his connections extended into City Hall and beyond, and there was never enough evidence to bring formal charges. Every investigation that had ever approached his orbit had mysteriously stalled or been reassigned. Sarah studied his photograph, a handsome man in his early 50s with silver hair, and the confident smile of someone who had never faced real consequences. "We need inside information," she told Webb during one of their clandestine meetings. "Someone who knows how Harlow operates, someone willing to flip." Webb shook his head. "Everyone who's ever worked with Harlow is either dead, disappeared, or too scared to talk. The man has a reputation for making problems go away permanently." Sarah thought about this as she drove home that night, Max dozing in the back seat. The Christmas decorations throughout the city seemed to mock the darkness she had uncovered, their cheerful lights a thin veneer over the corruption that ran like sewage beneath the streets. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the car following her. It was a black sedan, maintaining a perfect three-car distance, making every turn she made. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She took a series of random turns, looping through neighborhoods she knew well, and the sedan followed each one. Max had woken in the back seat, sensing the change in her energy, his head up and alert. Sarah reached for her radio, then stopped. If there were compromised officers involved, calling for backup might bring the wrong kind of help. Instead, she made a decision that went against every protocol she had ever learned. She pulled into a gas station, parked under the brightest light she could find, and stepped out of the vehicle. The sedan pulled into the lot a moment later, parking 2 pumps away. Sarah kept her hand near her weapon and waited. The driver's door opened, and a woman emerged. She was mid-30s, well-dressed in a way that screamed money but not taste, and she looked absolutely terrified. "Lieutenant Collins?" The woman's voice shook. "My name is Diana Mercer. I was Robert Kellerman's girlfriend, and I know who killed him." Sarah's first instinct was suspicion. Diana Mercer could be a setup, a lure designed to draw her into an ambush or feed her false information. But the woman's fear was genuine, the kind of bone-deep terror that couldn't be faked. Sarah made a quick decision. "Get in my vehicle. We'll talk somewhere safe." They ended up at a 24-hour diner in a part of town where nobody asked questions and everybody minded their own business. Max sat under the table, his body pressed against Sarah's legs. While Diana Mercer told her story between sips of coffee she couldn't seem to keep down. "Robert thought he was smart," Diana began, her hands wrapped around her cup like a lifeline. "He thought he could play both sides, take from Harlow's organization while building his own escape fund. He told me we were going to disappear, start over somewhere warm where nobody knew our names." Sarah listened without interrupting, filing away details, looking for inconsistencies. He started copying files, financial records, transaction histories, everything Harlow had worked so hard to keep hidden. He was going to use them as insurance, blackmail Harlow into letting him walk away clean. Diana laughed bitterly. "Harlow found out, of course he found out. He has people everywhere, including inside the police department." Sarah leaned forward. "Do you know who? Names, positions, anything concrete?" Diana shook her head. "Robert never told me specifics. He said it was better if I didn't know, safer. But he mentioned a detective, someone high up who had been on Harlow's payroll for years, and he mentioned something else." She paused, gathering courage. "He said the Christmas tree lots weren't just for laundering money, they were for disposal. Every year, after the season ended, Harlow's people would use the lots to get rid of problems. The trees get mulched and scattered across city parks. Nobody ever looks twice at a pile of wood chips." Sarah felt sick. "How many victims?" Diana's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. Robert said at least a dozen over the past 5 years. Businessmen who got too greedy, witnesses who knew too much, competitors who wouldn't sell." She broke down completely. They put him there because it was ironic. He tried to expose the operation, so they made him part of it. Sarah gave the woman time to compose herself, her mind racing through the implications. If Diana was telling the truth, Harlow's organization wasn't just involved in financial crimes, it was a murder machine, disposing of bodies through the city's own composting system. The victims had been mulched into the soil of Atlanta's parks, walked on by families who had no idea they were treading on graves. "I need those files Robert copied," Sarah said finally. "Do you have them?" Diana nodded quickly. "He gave me a backup before he disappeared, a flash drive. I've been too scared to look at it, but I still have it." Sarah drove Diana to a motel on the outskirts of the city and paid for a room in cash. "Stay here. Don't contact anyone. Don't use your credit cards. I'll have someone I trust pick up the flash drive tomorrow." Diana grabbed Sarah's arm as she turned to leave. "Be careful, Lieutenant. Harlow knows about you. Robert mentioned your name once, said you were one of the few cops who couldn't be bought. That makes you dangerous to them." Sarah met her eyes. Good. The flash drive contained exactly what Diana had promised. Spreadsheets documenting 15 years of transactions, shell company registrations, property records, and communications between Harlow and his associates. It also contained a list of names, 19 in total, with dates next to each one. Dates that corresponded to missing persons, reports that had never been solved. Webb looked physically ill as he scrolled through the files. "This is it," he breathed. "This is everything we need to bring him down." Sarah didn't share his optimism. "It's everything we need, if we can get it to someone who will actually act on it. But if Harlow has people inside the department, inside the DA's office, maybe even inside the FBI, how do we know who to trust?" The question haunted them both. They spent hours debating strategies, considering federal agencies, journalists, even direct approach to the mayor's office. Each option carried risks, potential leaks that could warn Harlow and send him fleeing to a country without extradition treaties. In the end, it was Max who provided the breakthrough. Sarah was walking him through downtown Atlanta, taking a break from the endless strategizing, when Max suddenly veered toward a building she recognized. The federal courthouse. He sat at the entrance and looked at her with those intelligent amber eyes, waiting for her to understand. Sarah stared at the building, thinking, federal court, federal judges, people appointed for life, beyond the reach of local corruption, with the power to issue warrants and convene grand juries. She thought about a judge she had testified before 2 years ago, a woman named Margaret Chen, who had a reputation for integrity that bordered on legendary. Chen had thrown out cases with procedural problems no matter how guilty the defendants seemed, and she had sent law enforcement officers to prison when they violated civil rights. She was feared, respected, and absolutely incorruptible. Sarah made a call to Webb. "I have an idea. It's risky, maybe even illegal, but it might be our only shot." 24 hours later, Sarah sat in Judge Chen's chambers with a copy of the flash drive and a prayer that she was making the right choice. The judge listened to her presentation without interruption, her expression revealing nothing. When Sarah finished, Chen sat in silence for a long moment. "You understand that what you're describing implicates not only a prominent citizen, but potentially members of law enforcement and other government officials?" Sarah nodded. "I understand. That's why I came to you." Chen's eyes were sharp behind her glasses. "You took a significant risk bringing this directly to me. If I were compromised, your career and possibly your life would be in danger." Sarah thought about Diana Mercer hiding in a motel room, about Robert Kellerman's body wrapped in plastic, about the 19 names on that list, representing people who had simply disappeared. Some risks are worth taking. The judge studied her for another long moment, then reached for her phone. "I'm going to make some calls, secure calls to people I trust absolutely. If what you're telling me is accurate, we're going to need a task force from outside the local jurisdiction. FBI, maybe Treasury, definitely the U.S. Attorney's Office." She paused. "You should prepare yourself, Lieutenant. Once this starts, there's no stopping it. People you work with, people you might consider friends, could be implicated. The fallout will be significant." Sarah thought about Max waiting in the car, about the badge she wore, about what it was supposed to represent. "I can handle it." The operation came together with a speed that surprised even Sarah. Judge Chen's contacts proved extensive and trustworthy, and within 48 hours, a joint task force had been assembled under the tightest security protocols. Sarah found herself briefing FBI agents and Treasury investigators, walking them through the evidence, identifying potential witnesses. Diana Mercer was moved to a federal safe house and began the long process of formal debriefing. The net closed around Vincent Harlow on a cold morning, 3 days before Christmas. Sarah wasn't part of the arrest team. her role in the investigation carefully concealed to protect her as a witness, but she watched from a distance as federal agents swarmed Harlow's estate in Buckhead. The man who had orchestrated so much death and corruption was led out in handcuffs, his silver hair disheveled, his confident smile finally gone. The arrests didn't stop there. Over the following week, 17 people were taken into custody, including 2 Atlanta police officers, an assistant district attorney, and a city councilman. Each arrest sent shockwaves through the community, eroding trust in institutions that people had relied upon. But Sarah understood that the trust had been misplaced all along. Better to know the truth, however painful, than to live in comfortable ignorance. Gerald Finch, the Christmas tree lot owner, was cleared of any knowing involvement. He had been an unwitting pawn, a legitimate businessman used as cover for operations he knew nothing about. He reached out to Sarah to thank her, his voice thick with emotion, and promised that next year's lot would be dedicated to the memory of the victims who had been found because of her persistence. The investigation into the 19 names on Kellerman's list proved more complicated. Some of the victims had been reported missing years ago, their cases long cold. Others had never been reported at all, forgotten people whose absence hadn't even registered as a crime. The city began the grim process of examining mulch sites in public parks, looking for remains that might provide closure to families who had never stopped wondering. Max received a commendation from the department, a formal recognition of his role in breaking open the case. Sarah accepted the certificate on his behalf, scratching behind his ears as cameras flashed. He tolerated the attention with his usual dignity. Though she caught him yawning once during the commissioner's speech, some things never changed. Diana Mercer entered the Witness Protection Program, scheduled to testify in what promised to be the most significant corruption trial in Atlanta's history. She wrote Sarah a letter before she disappeared, thanking her for believing a terrified woman in a gas station parking lot, for taking a risk when everything in her training probably screamed at her to be cautious. Sarah kept the letter in her desk drawer, a reminder that sometimes the right thing and the smart thing were not the same thing. The trial would take months, maybe years, to fully conclude. Lawyers would argue, appeals would be filed, and the machinery of justice would grind forward at its own deliberate pace. But for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like the system was working the way it was supposed to. The guilty were facing consequences, the innocent were being protected, and the truth was finally coming to light. On Christmas Eve, Sarah found herself back at the tree lot. It had reopened for the final days of the season, staffed by volunteers from the department who wanted to ensure the location wasn't defined solely by tragedy. Families wandered between the pines, children's laughter echoing off the surrounding buildings. The whole scene a stubborn assertion of normalcy in the face of darkness. Max walked beside her, off-leash now, his nose occasionally investigating interesting scents, but mostly just enjoying the freedom to explore. They made their way to the back of the lot, to the spot where it had all begun, where Max had frozen and pointed and set everything in motion. Someone had placed a small memorial there, a wooden cross with 19 names carved into it. Flowers surrounded it despite the cold, some fresh, some wilted, all representing someone who cared enough to remember. Sarah stood before the memorial for a long time, Max sitting quietly at her side. She thought about the choices that had led her here, the risks she had taken, the times she had doubted herself. She thought about Diana Mercer's courage, about Judge Chen's integrity, about Webb's dogged determination to see justice done. She thought about all the people who had helped, known and unknown, each contributing something to a result none of them could have achieved alone. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost inappropriate given the solemnity of the moment. But Sarah had learned that the world didn't pause for tragedy, that beauty and horror existed side by side, that life insisted on continuing no matter what darkness tried to stop it. Max pressed against her leg, and she looked down at him. His amber eyes reflected the sunset, wise and warm and eternally patient. He had found 19 victims who might never have been discovered. He had exposed a conspiracy that had poisoned the city for years. He had done it not for recognition or reward, but because it was his nature to find what was hidden, to bring truth to light. Sarah knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck, feeling the strong heartbeat beneath his fur. "Good boy," she whispered. "You did good." They stayed there until the sun finished setting and the Christmas lights came on, transforming the lot into a wonderland of color and warmth. Then they walked back to the car together, partner and partner, ready for whatever came next. The city spread before them, vast and complex and deeply flawed, but also resilient and hopeful and constantly striving to be better. It was worth protecting, Sarah thought, worth fighting for, worth the risks and the sacrifices and the sleepless nights. Atlanta had its demons, but it also had its guardians. And tonight, at least, the guardians had won. The weeks that followed brought a mixture of relief and exhaustion that Sarah had never quite experienced before. The adrenaline of the investigation had carried her through impossible days and sleepless nights, but now that the immediate crisis had passed, the accumulated fatigue hit her like a wave. She found herself sleeping 10 hours at a time, her body demanding the rest it had been denied. Max seemed to understand, spending those long nights curled at the foot of her bed, his presence a comfort she didn't know she needed until it was there. The department underwent what the brass called a comprehensive internal review and what everyone else called a house cleaning. Officers who had looked the other way, who had accepted favors or failed to report suspicious activity, found themselves facing disciplinary hearings and early retirements. The union protested, as unions do, but the evidence was overwhelming and the public mood unforgiving. People wanted accountability, and for once, they got it. Sarah was offered a promotion 3 times in January. Each time she declined, preferring to remain in the K-9 unit where she felt most useful. The brass didn't understand her reluctance, seeing her actions during the investigation as proof she was ready for command positions with more authority and visibility. But Sarah knew herself well enough to recognize that she worked best in the field, with Max at her side, doing the kind of work that made a tangible difference rather than pushing paper and attending meetings. Webb was not so fortunate in his ability to avoid advancement. He was promoted to captain, a position he accepted with the resignation of a man who understood that refusing would only delay the inevitable. They still worked together occasionally, coordinating on cases that crossed jurisdictional lines, but Sarah missed the easy partnership they had developed during the investigation. Some things were lost when you won. The trial began in March, a media circus that dominated local news and attracted national attention. Vincent Harlow hired the most expensive defense attorneys in the country, who proceeded to file motion after motion, challenging evidence, questioning procedures, attacking the credibility of witnesses. Sarah testified over the course of 3 days, her time on the stand a grueling exercise in precision and patience. The defense attorneys tried every trick they knew, attempting to confuse her, to make her contradict herself, to find any weakness they could exploit. But Sarah had spent her career testifying in court, and she remained calm and consistent throughout. Max waited outside the courthouse each day, cared for by fellow officers who understood the bond between handler and K-9. When Sarah emerged after her final day of testimony, exhausted and drained, Max bounded toward her with his tail wagging and his whole body wriggling with joy. She knelt on the courthouse steps and let him cover her face with kisses. not caring about the cameras or the onlookers or the dignity expected of a lieutenant. Some moments were more important than appearances. The verdict came in June, on the hottest day of the year so far. Sarah was in the field when she got the news, responding to a call about a suspicious package at a downtown office building that turned out to be someone's forgotten lunch. Her radio crackled with the information that Vincent Harlow had been found guilty on all 37 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, racketeering, and obstruction of justice. Sentencing would come later, but the prosecutors were confident he would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Sarah sat in her patrol vehicle and let the news sink in. Max was in the back, his tongue lolling from the heat, watching her with curious eyes. She thought about all the people who had made this moment possible, the chain of courage and integrity that had stretched from Diana Mercer's terrified decision to approach a stranger in a gas station, to Judge Chen's willingness to act on information brought to her outside normal channels. She thought about Robert Kellerman, a criminal himself, but also a victim whose death had started everything. She thought about the 19 names on his list, most of them still unidentified, families still waiting for answers that might never come. The victory felt incomplete, as all victories do. Harlow was convicted, but his network had tentacles that reached beyond what the investigation had exposed. Some of his associates had fled before they could be arrested. Some of the corruption they had uncovered remained unaddressed, protected by technicalities and statutes of limitations. The world was not a just place, not naturally, not without constant effort to make it so. But it was a better place than it had been 6 months ago. Sarah started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, Max settling into his customary position in the back seat. The city spread before them in the summer heat, shimmering and sweating and stubbornly alive. There would be other cases, other challenges, other moments when everything seemed to hang in the balance. But for now, this day, this moment, they had won. And that would have to be enough. The summer brought a kind of normalcy that Sarah had almost forgotten existed. Routine patrols, training exercises with Max, the day-to-day work of a K-9 unit that didn't involve massive conspiracies or existential threats to the department. She found herself appreciating the smaller cases again, the missing persons found hiding from abusive partners, the drug interdictions that kept poison off the streets, the moments of genuine connection with a community that was slowly rebuilding its trust in law enforcement. Max turned 7 in August, and the unit threw him a party complete with a cake made of ground beef and decorated with bacon. He ate it in approximately 45 seconds, then spent the rest of the afternoon begging for more. Sarah took photos and sent them to her parents, who had never quite understood her choice to work with dogs, but had come to appreciate Max's role in her life. Her mother sent back a photo of their family dog, a geriatric golden retriever named Biscuit, wearing a birthday hat in solidarity. Diana Mercer sent a postcard from somewhere she was not allowed to specify, a generic beach scene with a handwritten note on the back. "Thank you for believing me. Starting over is hard, but it's better than the alternative. Take care of yourself and that wonderful dog." Sarah pinned the postcard to the bulletin board in her office, next to Max's commendation certificate and a photo from the Tree Lot Memorial. Reminders of what they had accomplished, what they had survived, what they had become. The fall arrived with a cooling that felt like mercy after the brutal summer heat. Atlanta prepared for another holiday season, another cycle of decorations and celebrations, and the eternal human impulse to find joy even in dark times. Sarah heard that the Buckhead Christmas Tree Emporium would be opening again, under new ownership this time, with a portion of the proceeds going to a fund for families of the victims found on the property. She made a note to stop by, to show her support, to let them know that the community hadn't forgotten. Halloween passed, then Thanksgiving, and suddenly it was December again. The anniversary of the day Max had frozen at the tree lot, the day everything had changed. Sarah found herself thinking about it more than she expected, the memory of that cold morning playing on repeat in her mind. The frost on the trees, the steam of her breath, the way Max's body had tensed with the certainty of discovery. She had been so focused on the immediate task that she hadn't truly processed the magnitude of what they had stumbled upon. She was doing it now, a year later, and the weight of it was significant. On the morning of the anniversary, Sarah took Max to the tree lot. It was bustling with customers, a healthy crowd of families and couples searching for the perfect tree. Volunteers manned the entrance, collecting donations for the memorial fund, their red Santa hats a cheerful contrast to the solemnity of the cause. Sarah recognized some of them, fellow officers who had been moved by the case, civilians who had read about it in the news and wanted to help. The memorial had been made permanent, a stone marker now replacing the wooden cross, the 19 names carved deep where weather couldn't erase them. Flowers still surrounded it, fresh ones laid that morning by hands Sarah couldn't identify but appreciated nonetheless. Someone had added a wreath with a ribbon that said, "Never forgotten," the words, a promise and a challenge. Sarah stood before the memorial with Max at her side, both of them motionless in the midst of the surrounding activity. She thought about the year that had passed, the trials and tribulations, the victories and frustrations. She thought about the people she had helped and the ones she couldn't save, the balance sheet of her career that never quite seemed to even out. She thought about why she did this job, why she had chosen a path that brought her into contact with the worst of humanity on a daily basis. The answer stood beside her, amber eyes watching the crowd, alert and intelligent and endlessly faithful. She did it because she could, because she had skills and a partner that allowed her to make a difference. She did it because someone had to, because the alternative was surrendering the world to those who would exploit and destroy it. She did it because every time Max found something hidden, every time they brought a criminal to justice or returned a missing person home, she reaffirmed her belief that good could triumph over evil if people were willing to fight for it. Max pressed against her leg, and Sarah looked down to find him gazing at her with something that looked remarkably like understanding. He didn't know what anniversaries were, didn't grasp the human concept of marking time's passage with reflection and ceremony. But he knew her moods and needs and feelings in a way that transcended language. He was offering comfort simply by being present, by being the constant companion he had always been. Sarah knelt beside him, running her hands through his fur, feeling the warmth of his body and the steady rhythm of his breathing. "One more year," she said quietly. "One more year of making a difference. What do you say, partner?" Max's tail wagged once, twice, a response that Sarah chose to interpret as enthusiastic agreement. She stood up and adjusted her uniform, squaring her shoulders against the cold December air. The lot bustled around them, people going about the business of celebrating a season that had once been tainted by discovery and death. Life continued as it always did, the wheel turning without regard for what had come before. Sarah led Max toward the exit, nodding at the volunteers, accepting the thanks of those who recognized her, maintaining the professional demeanor expected of a lieutenant in the Atlanta Police Department. But inside, she felt something close to peace. Not happiness exactly, not the uncomplicated joy that had been possible before she knew how dark the world could be, but something deeper, more sustainable. The satisfaction of duty performed, of purpose fulfilled, of partnership proven through trial and fire. They reached the patrol vehicle, and Sarah opened the back door for Max to jump in. He did so with the ease of long practice, settling into his position with a satisfied sigh. Sarah closed the door and walked around to the driver's side, pausing to look back at the tree lot one more time. The sun was breaking through the morning clouds, casting golden light across the scene, making the frost on the trees sparkle like diamonds. It was beautiful in its way. A place of death transformed into a place of memory and hope. A crime scene become a memorial. Darkness converted through effort and time, and the stubborn human refusal to be defeated, into something approaching light. Sarah got in the car and started the engine. Max met her eyes in the rearview mirror, alert and ready, always ready for whatever came next. She pulled out of the parking lot and into the flow of Atlanta traffic, two partners in an endless struggle against chaos and cruelty. The radio crackled with a new call, a suspicious activity report on the other side of the city. Sarah acknowledged the dispatch and changed direction, Max shifting in the back as if he understood that their brief moment of reflection was over. There would be time for memories later. Right now, there was work to do. The city spread before them, vast and complicated and endlessly in need of protection. Sarah Collins and K-9 Max drove toward the next challenge, the next test, the next opportunity to make a difference in a world that desperately needed it. They had done it before, many times. They would do it again, as many times as necessary. That was the job. That was the calling. That was the partnership they had built together. Handler and K-9, human and dog, two souls united in purpose and trust, and an unshakable commitment to justice. And as they drove through the streets of Atlanta, past Christmas decorations and holiday shoppers, and all the ordinary beauty of a city in celebration, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt grateful. Grateful for the work, for the partner beside her, for the chance to serve something greater than herself. The world was broken in 1,000 ways, but it was also filled with people trying to fix it, one case at a time, one day at a time, one act of courage at a time. She was one of them. Max was one of them. And together they would keep going until they couldn't anymore, until the final call came and the last chase ended and the partnership concluded in whatever way partnerships conclude. But that day was not today. Today, there was work to do. Sarah pressed the accelerator and felt the vehicle surge forward, Max's tail wagging in the back seat at the familiar sensation of acceleration and purpose. The radio crackled again, dispatch confirming details, and Sarah responded with the clipped professionalism of a veteran officer. The suspicious activity could be nothing. It could be everything. That was the nature of the job, the eternal uncertainty that made every shift a new adventure. The city welcomed them back into its embrace, streets and buildings and the million stories unfolding behind every window and door. Somewhere out there, someone needed help. Someone was in danger or afraid or lost in ways that couldn't be mapped by GPS. Sarah and Max would find them, as they had found so many before. It was what they did. It was who they were, partners in every sense of the word, united by something stronger than training or duty, or even the years of shared experience. United by a bond that transcended species, that made them more together than either could ever be alone. The December sun climbed higher in the sky, burning off the last of the morning frost. Atlanta moved toward another day, another moment in its endless history of struggle and triumph, and through its streets a patrol vehicle carried a woman and a dog toward whatever destiny awaited them, ready for anything, afraid of nothing, together against the world, always together, always forward, always ready to answer the call.